On the Wado Radio Show.
Yes, it's DJ Wado. It's the Wado Radio Show. It's more than music. It is ministry, man. And we have a friend of the show, man, with all that's going on in our country in terms of police brutality, issues of justice, and even internationally, man, with the stuff going on in Turkey. I thought this was the perfect guy to come on and just kind of have some honest dialogue. You know, we've had him on before, around these issues of justice, man, and it's just good to have him back. We got Pastor Michael McBride of the Way Church in Berkeley, California. He's also director of urban strategies for the Pico Network and the Live Free campaign. Pastor McBride, what's up, bro?
What's happening, Wado? How you doing, sir?
Man, I'm great. Considering everything that's going on, man. I think, man, I'm probably like a lot of people right now, and I'm just looking around, man, and just saying, man, how the heck did we get here as a country to have all of this unrest and, seemingly every day a new news story?
Well, I think that it's really important to appreciate that we as a country are really experiencing the covers coming off of who we are and really what is happening in many communities across the country.
Sure.
There's not been one day in the history of this country where black and brown bodies, indigenous bodies, have not been subjected to arbitrary violence at the hands of the state.
Right.
People have been experiencing all kinds of degradation and dehumanization, and it's really been something that most often many of us have denied, or at least we've ignored. But certainly the last several weeks, for sure, one could even argue if you go all the way back to Ferguson,
yep.
That we're seeing an exposure of the kind of state violence that is really as American as apple pie, as they say, and it should disturb all of us, for sure.
Sure. Man, one of the things that that happened in the media last week was when the governor of Minnesota raised the question of if this happened to a white kid, would we still react the same? Or would this kid had ended up, being killed at the hands of a police officer? I don't think so. And I felt like that was almost a turning point for someone in authority like that to basically admit, what was happening wasn't right.
Yeah, well, the irony of this is that there are just as many white Americans, just by sheer numbers, that are being killed by the police as black Americans.
Yeah.
And of course, the rate is different because there's so many,
yep.
More folks who identify as white Americans in the United States. But we do have a law enforcement apparatus that is increasingly showing itself to be unaccountable and literally shooting first and asking questions later. And I think all of us who love peace and justice have to question the extrajudicial killings that are happening, the rate at which they're happening, and the inability of even the federal government to hold folks accountable. It's a perilous moment we're living in, and it's even becoming more dangerous because the national narrative is now, pushing this thought that police are under attack, right? That there's this big conspiracy out here to attack and ambush and kill police, and that could be nothing further than the truth. I think it's really important for we, particularly us from the faith community, we who live in urban communities, we need to resist the hysteria of the national narrative and really start to work towards peace and justice, peacemaking, both between Pookie and Ray Ray, between the community and law enforcement, and dare I say, between the government and our global partners who live on this earth as stewards of God's great creation.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that I'm noticing is I'm seeing more dialogue between many of these different fractions, particularly in my local community, I'm seeing a lot more of that stuff. But I'm also still seeing some areas where it's slow to take place. How do we overcome that? Because I almost feel like in order for things to really get on one accord, you gotta have some dialogue between the community and the police and the government and a lot of these other entities and stakeholders that are involved in this, man.
Yeah, well, dialogue is important. I say it all the time, though. The dialogue has to be grounded in truth.
Right.
A lot of our American conversations
Yep.
wanna push a beautiful lie rather than wrestle with the ugly truth, right? And the beautiful lie is we are overdetermined. Or the beautiful lie is that we all can just come together by singing kumbaya and by sitting around a table and talking through these issues and these challenges without any accountability, without anyone changing, without any systems being transformed or reimagined. But the ugly truth is that we are a society that, if I were to just speak theologically for a second, we have a human nature that is overcome by human weakness. And that human weakness creates all kinds of spaces for anger, fear, and pain to set in and causes us to have irrational hatred, irrational fear towards those who are different from us. It causes us to hoard power and to use our power to lord over others and use the difference, whether it's racial or class or sexual orientation or gender. Use these differences to then, scapegoat and perpetuate violence upon one another. So until we're able to really talk in a very nuanced way about the ways in which power, the ways in which difference, the ways in which force, violence are being used, and we are actually being used as a tool of those forces, then I think we're going to continue to just keep missing these opportunities and these moments that create space for some radical change. And I think the church has to really step up and become a lot more sensitive and put our finger on the pulse of what's happening, not be an escapist space where we just kind of retreat into some of our four walls and close our eyes and just hope and pray that the by and by happens. We have to use these gifts that God's given us, our faith, our theology, our history, and lean into this moment as redeemers, not as people run into refuge.
Yep. I've been seeing a lot of people, even African Americans, that are kind of, I don't want to say talking bad about protesting, but I think some people are getting tired of protests. I'm personally a fan of protests, but I know you've been protesting a ton over these past few years. With all of these cases, you travel a lot. You're on the ground level in a lot of cases in these spaces, man. And for people who, may not be in that world per se, just talk to people about some of the benefits and some of the progress that you've seen made via a lot of the protesting that we've seen, taking place over the past few years when it comes to issues of justice.
Well, I think it's important, for people to not be ahistorical in their existence. As Black people, man, we are falling in line with a history of resistance. I mean, every day you wake up is an act of protest, one could argue, right? Because we're living in a society and a system that is literally trying to take freedom and, dare I say, our very lives away from us. And that may sound hyperbolic, but if you look at all the evidence, how could you not come to this conclusion? We have a historical set of policies that have constantly, since the day we've been here, tried to exploit our labor, have systematically broken up our families, have ushered in the school to prison pipeline, have criminalized our bodies, have flooded our communities with drugs, poverty, guns, and then blame us for not being able to resist the regular human social ills that every other community experiences across the planet, right? So for those who are tired of protesting, just understand that those who are protesting are tired as well. This is not like a great adventure many of us enjoy doing. This country was founded on a protest.
Yep.
The Boston Tea Party was a protest.
Yep.
Every stage in this country's struggle for liberation by certain people was driven by protest. Dr. Martin Luther King protested. Some of our bishops, Bishop Henry McNeil Turner from the AME Church protested. Fannie Lou Hamer, Harriet Tubman. I mean, these are people we all celebrate. But then today we would frown and turn our nose down at those who are actually attempting to win liberation that would benefit many of our families. I think the greatest irony of this is that the gains we've gotten so far just in the last couple years have actually benefited every single African American person in this country, many of whom, or some of whom, would say that they don't like the way in which they've achieved or been able to reach for more freedom.
Yeah.
So I think that protesting is important. Jesus said it like this: "I've come to start a fire on the earth. How I wish it were blazing right now. I've come to change everything, turn everything right side up. How I long for it to be finished. Do you think I came to smooth things over and make everything nice? Not so. I've come to disrupt and confront." Now, this is the Jesus I follow. And I hope this is the Jesus many of us can get more in tune with. When I say Jesus, I'm not talking about the light-skinned Michelangelo figure with a bad perm. Touch your neighbor, bruh. I'm talking about a dark-skinned Palestinian Jew who was born in a hood called Nazareth, who was targeted unfairly by the government of his day. He was unfairly arrested. He was tried in a kangaroo court, and he was convicted by an unjust judge and executed by the state, by the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
That's the Jesus I follow. And that Jesus is a liberator. He's our savior. He's someone that spoke against the systemic injustices of his day. They didn't put him on the cross because he loved everybody.
Right.
They put him on the cross because he was trying to disrupt the status quo and bring salvation to the soul and the body. And this is what we're called to be, people who are following and being faithful to this life of Jesus. And protest is a part of that, particularly for us who are experiencing levels of exclusion and oppression that we have not seen this explicit, one could argue, since maybe the Civil Rights Movement.
Yeah, man. Man, that's good stuff, bro. One of the things that's really disappointed me in the past couple of days is the demonization of the Black Lives Matter movement. Because I've felt like people are trying to, the media in particular, are trying to portray it as something that it really isn't. You know what I mean? And, we saw something very similar happen. Well, I didn't see it. I wasn't alive. But when you study history, you saw something very similar happen with the Black Panthers in the 70s. You have a lot of people that look at that group as just, oh, man, they're just some violent group that's, trying to, kill all white people. And it's like that. It's not even close to that, man. And, I know you've had a lot of dealings and even worked hand in hand with some of the leaders of that group. And so you have a very different perspective of them, obviously.
Yeah, well, I think, I know those of us who are participating in this kind of liberation, struggle of our time, that's known as the Black Lives Matter movement, certainly reject and find offensive any characterization that would say that demanding that police stop killing us is the same as calling for the execution of police. Right. I mean, that is such a ridiculous and terrible correlation, right? It is misrepresentative of the intent of what we're saying, and it's also a great sign of our criminalization as Black people, that we cannot demand our own, freedom from state violence, from arbitrary violence, without, attacking or being accused of attacking the state. I just think it's tantamount to the Jewish folk who were going through the Holocaust, resisting Hitler at every stage, and then being accused of trying to, call for the execution of all Germans or even Hitler himself, just by trying to not get into the gas chamber, right? I just think it's a terrible correlation, and none of us in the Black Lives Matter movement, I've been in meetings with all of the leaders. I know them all very personally. None of us talk about killing police officers. As a matter of fact, we all believe it's a terrible strategy for anyone to go down that route,
right?
Because it increases the brutality of the state. It totally turns the public opinion against us. We don't have the weapons. We don't have the discipline. We don't have the formations to be able to even mount an attack like that and survive or win. Our strategy is to use nonviolent protests, the kind that Dr. Martin Luther King, Mahatma Gandhi, and many others before them have used to expose the contradictions of the oppressor, and to hopefully shift the hearts and the minds of those who would look on the TV and see militarized police driving tanks down the streets of America.
Right.
Look on the TV and see tear gas and weapons of war being used on American citizens, and start to ask themselves the question, man, is this the kind of country we want to live in? And that's really part and parcel of why strategically we use nonviolence resistance and civil disobedience as a tactic. And let me just also say that these are all protected under the Constitution of the United States.
Right.
So part of what I just want to keep advising folks is to make sure that we are not denying our own, constitutional rights just because the mainstream media is attempting to connect our resistance work, our liberation work, to a false narrative. Black Lives Matter is not the problem. It is not the reason why we have these issues today. Let's just remember, like I said earlier, there's not been one day in the history of this country where we have not had arbitrary violence, visiting our community. So, back before the war on drugs happened, Black communities were still being brutalized by the state, by the police. Before Black Panther Party, before Dr. Martin Luther King. I mean, remember, they said Dr. Martin Luther King was responsible for all the violence that was happening in the country when it was happening. Now, we're talking about somebody now we revere as a nonviolent civil rights leader.
Right.
Every stage of this resistance fight, you're going to find the government trying to put the blame on those who are trying to reach for freedom, and it's incumbent upon us, as the scriptures say, "Whom the Son has set free is free indeed." Let's live and act as free people and claim our dignity, and not continue to capitulate or bend or feel like we have to apologize or defend ourselves against what our king called the greatest purveyor of violence in the world, and that's the United States government.
Sure. For people who are just regular everyday citizens, they might not be involved to the extent that you are on a network like this. Maybe they just go to church on a regular basis. You work your job, whatever the case may be, and they're saying, man, how can I help enact change, in this situation? I'm seeing this injustice. I just don't know what to do. What advice would you give those people, bro?
That's a great question. So we tried to break it down very plainly, right? We call in the Live Free campaign the strategy for liberation grounded in our faith. We have to use the body, the ballot, and the buck. The body, the ballot, the buck. We talk about the body. We're talking about what does it mean for us to take seriously that our personal bodies and our institutional bodies need to be organized and used in the service of liberation of all people, particularly people of color and poor people.
Sure.
So what does it mean for us to get ourselves organized? One of our mentors said a disorganized truth will find it difficult to defeat an organized lie. And the problem with many of our communities, we're just not organized, right? So our individual bodies, we're so bought into radical individuality, right? We don't think that we're connected to one another. We have to get organized and learn some information that we may not know. We have to get our churches and congregations, our nonprofits, organized and moving in the same direction towards liberation. The ballot, we have to make sure that we are using our legislative and civic engagement tools to help change policies, not just at the federal level. So, of course, you have an election upon us, but don't you know that there are local initiatives, local fights electorally that we need to pay attention to? If we want to change mass incarceration, the biggest kind of portal for mass incarceration is our local district attorney and our sheriff.
Right.
So if you and I could focus on our local prosecutors, district attorneys, and sheriffs, those races are not having margins of victory that are in the millions, like the federal elections, not even in the hundreds of thousands, but they're usually in the hundreds. They're usually in the thousands.
Yep.
And that means that if a large church, if we organize the streets and got Pookie and Ray Ray and Nene and all these folks, we got them registered to vote and put them in a position to help define who and how their local cities would be ran and governed, we could change a lot in a short amount of time. And then, of course, the buck. How do we leverage the $1 trillion of assets that we have as the Black community and put them into banks that are ran and owned by Black folks, put them into credit unions owned and ran by Black folks? How do we stop feeding the system, the corporate interests that are actually creating private prisons, private detention centers, doing things that are actually increasing the criminalization of our people? So there's a lot of concrete things you can do. If you want some help, you can visit livefreeusa.org. We have a team of organizers all across the country that are specializing in helping to activate Black congregations, faith leaders, Christians of all races and backgrounds, give folks some support, do some theological development, but also put people into action. And we are committed to doing so. We have to dismantle these forms of white supremacy, these forms of racial hierarchy. We have to dismantle this demon and this spirit of death that is taking a hold of our communities and our country. And I think the church has to be on the front line to do that.
Let me ask you to explain this as well. I was having a conversation the other day with some Christian brothers and sisters, and we started talking about mass incarceration and privatized prisons. And I realized that they didn't even know what that meant. Like, they hear the term and they believe like, oh yeah, this is something that I should care about. But they, a couple of them basically admitted, man, I don't even really understand what's going on with that. Like, what is that? Are there really private companies that own prisons? And if so, what's the difference between that and the government running a prison? And so I explained it to him, man, but I just, obviously you're on the front lines of this, and I just asked that you would, just kind of share that with people, because it hit me. I said, man, there may be some other people out here that feel the same way, bro.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So we have in this country over 2 million people who are locked in jails and prisons across the country.
Yep.
We have highest incarceration rate per capita than any other nation. So in the land of the free, in the home of the brave, we lock up more people than countries we would call communist, we would call oppressive, we would call brutal, we would call, all these derogatory names. The United States of America has locked up many, many more people. And many of us who are locked up are poor people and people of color. We have private prisons that are being ran by the Corrections Corporation of America, GEO Group. These are for-profit companies who are buying the prisons from state governments, and they are making state governments, particularly governors, sign paperwork that says they must keep the prisons at least 90% filled. And if they don't keep the prisons 90% filled, then we have to pay for the beds. Taxpayers have to pay for the empty beds. So it's like it is a disincentive for us to actually reduce crime and to end the criminalization of our own people, because private prisons are actually profiting off of the mistakes of poor people, people of color. On the immigration.
And here's the thing. This I just want to interject here. This Corrections Corporation of America is actually a publicly traded company on the New York Stock Exchange.
Absolutely. And they are paying millions of dollars to lobbyists to pretty much buy elected officials, governors and senators and congressional members. So you wonder why we couldn't get like common sense gun regulation through the Congress. Well, it's because CCA and GO have bought congressional members. You wonder why we can't get less police repressive strategies happen in our community. Well, because these prison companies are actually feeding a unjust system through buying the votes of our elected officials. Now, it's important also to appreciate that private prison companies, though, make up a small number of the total population of those that are in prison. So the largest number of our people in prisons are in state prisons. That's why our fight, when we're talking about resistance, voting, the body, the ballot, the buck, we need to turn our attention to state policy. We need to vote at the state level and move money from prisons to people, from jails to schools and parks. Many of our young brothers and sisters who are in local jails, we have about 700,000 in local jails all across the country. Over 400,000 of those folks in local jails have not even been convicted of a crime yet.
Wow.
I want you to hear this.
Wow.
We got over 700,000 people in a local jail. Over 400,000 of them have not even been convicted of a crime. They're being held in jail because they cannot pay for bail. Right?
Wow.
And because the courts are not ensuring the constitutional right for a speedy trial, many of them can be in jail waiting for a trial for months at a time, years at a time, waiting for their day in court to actually, defend themselves. Now, if you're in jail that long, what's happening? You're losing your houses, you're losing your jobs, you're away from your children, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so many of them are being forced to take a plea deal so they can hurry up and try to get home and all kinds of things, right? So mass incarceration is an evil. It's a systemic evil that in many respects is targeting mostly nonviolent offenders, offenders who often, if you were white, would get rehab, drug rehabilitation. You would not get jail. You would get rehab, or you would be able to pay a bail bond and go home and let your lawyer close the case out. This is an unjust criminal system, and we have to resist it. Jesus reminds us that, or rather, Apostle Paul reminds us that we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers, evil and wickedness in high place. These are systems that we're resisting and dismantling. And again, the people of faith, man, we all got folks and loved ones caught in this system. We have to bring the power of God's Spirit and the love and the courage we have within ourselves to dismantle this system, or this system will take us out of here, and we'll say we participated in it. We were happy about it. We desired for it to happen, and I don't believe that's the case at all.
Absolutely, man. Once again, your website, livefreeusa.com.
Yeah, livefreeusa.org.
.org, I'm sorry. .org.
Yeah, and I'm on Twitter, Pastor Mike Mack, Pastor MYKMAC. Certainly follow us on Instagram. We really are trying to push this moment, this campaign, to really ensure that the lives of our folk are valued and matter in the public space. And I think the wind is at our backs. We just got to lean into it and push the football down the field as far as we can.
Man, that's what it is. Yo, Mike, man, as always, it's always a pleasure and a privilege, man, and definitely will be praying for you. And I definitely want to get involved with the voter registration, bro. So we need to talk about that offline, but because it's key. It's key. We got to get at the polls, man.
We're doing trainings all across the country, Wado, so maybe I'll come back in the next couple months and lay out where the trainings will be and how people can get connected to help do phone banking, social to the polls, all these different kind of ways.
Absolutely. Let's do it, bro. Let's do it, man.
Yeah.
Well, Pastor Mike, man, appreciate you, brother.
All right, Big Wade. Take care.
All right, man.
On the Wado Radio Show. On the Wado Radio. On the Wado Radio Show. Where it's much more than music, it's ministry.